Okay, it is now 8:13. We're coming back into session. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so if I'm following with the attorney and what
That's exactly what we're going to do.
we're doing is that the original motion was amended by Mr. Gregory, amended the hiring freeze to end date from January 15th to be moved to today's date, and that passed 5-0.
Okay.
And then
The amendment,
the amendment. Then
Mark?
won't need to do the second, which came to Skip.
The amendment by Mr. McCormick, seconded by Mr. Gregory, and adopted on a vote of 3-2, was to authorize the city manager to hire interim employees. So the motion as amended that sits now before the council is to change the date from January 15, 2019 to December 11, 2018, in the sentence, the city manager to extend the action on the October 9th, 2018 meeting was approved 3-2 to direct the city manager to extend the hiring freeze on full-time, part-time contract hires and position changes in all city departments until January 15, 2019, unless sooner resolved by council. And the change is to change January 15, 2019 to December 11, 2018, and to add that the city manager is authorized to hire interim employees. That is what is up for action now by the council.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second on the table. Douglas, do you agree with that statement?
We go back, the intent, this deals with items that are funded in the budget. So you have to stick with jobs that are funded in the budget that are not filled at this present time. And contract hires. And
Mark, is that what that says?
I believe that is the intent, and I believe the city manager understands that that is the intent. He's not intending to hire someone who's not in the budget. He's only wanting to fill positions as it becomes necessary to fill, so he has enough staff to operate the city.
Thank you. All in favor? It is unanimous. Thanks. Let's move on.
Mayor, in the future, if I believe or think a position is required and not funded, then I would bring it in front of council.
Well, hooray. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Next item, you're welcome. The next item is item number 4, discussion and possible action upon removing the hiring freeze in the administrative department to fill vacant position for the interim city secretary to ensure essential city services for the city of Castle Hills. Mr. Rapley?
I don't understand why we need this.
No action is necessary to pull, it needs to be pulled.
Thank you. The item is pulled. Item number 5, discussion and possible action upon removing the hiring freeze in the administrative department to fill vacant finance director position. As far as the services of the city of Castle Hills, do you wish to pull that item also?
no action necessary.
No.
Yes.
I actually vote on this because the finance director is now a department head, so that position needs to be posted.
I heard a pulling, so let's,
Mayor,
do
can
you
I
want to vote
clarify?
on that to decide whether we're going to pull it or not?
Mayor, can I clarify?
Of course.
Again, this is just to go through that process to select a finance director. Yes, it is to provide and select someone to bring in front of council for consideration and approval in the future.
Okay,
This is just so I can, again, the job has been posted, I've had applications, and I want to be able to move forward to hire someone and then eventually bring it in forward to have council review and approve that position or that person for the position.
Okay, no problem.
I think he said he wanted to pull it, and I'm in favor of pulling it. If we need to vote for it, let's vote. I don't see the need for it.
as long as we heard it once, that's good enough. Okay. Once, if it's good enough for everyone. Next item is 6, discussion and possible action on ordinance number 2018-12-11 to amend the fiscal 2019 Budget and Administration Department in order to extend the Administrative Assistant Finance Clerk position until June the 30th to ensure essential city services for the city of Castle Hills and continuation of the Passport Acceptance Office. Mr. Rapley?
Yes, Mayor, this position were eliminated in the budget as of September, and in discussion with not only Councilman McCormick, that this was a need in order to not only continue with the passport office, but in other areas of the finance clerk's duties, and keeping that going for the next 6 months. Again, this is, as of January 1st, will be an unfunded position, so this would need council's approval moving forward.
Do we have a motion and a second to get this into discussion, please?
So I will move.
Okay. Second? Thank you, Douglas. Okay, we have a motion by Ms. McCormick, Ms. McLean, and seconded by Douglas Gregory. Okay, let's start on the left. Mr. McCormick, did you have any thoughts on this particular item? Thank you.
If I can get my microphone to work. The thing that concerns me is that the assistant finance clerk position has been deleted from the budget as of December 31st, and it doesn't really seem appropriate to put it back in once we've taken it out. However, I do believe that we need to fund a position for the passport office, and I think Mr. Rapley can find other duties for Ms. Davis part-time until the passport office gets to be a full-time obligation. And hopefully that'll occur before June. So I'm looking at extending a position for the passport office until July, so we have time to act on it in June and make a decision by the 1st of July.
Ms. Scott, did you have any comments on this? Hang on, Mr. Rapley, I'll let you jump in. Go ahead, Ms. Scott.
Mr. Mayor, I think that's exactly what he's doing, is if you're extending the administrative assistant finance clerk position, that would then provide all the job description under that to fill the time not taken up by issuing passports, because the passports are coming in slowly. So what you said is true. We don't need a passport officer, but extending the administrative assistant finance clerk, which is already handling payroll, human resources, and assisting the finance director, it just makes sense if we're going to extend a position, go ahead and extend that position, which is also cross-trained to do passports. So as it's worded, I think it is perfectly adequate as worded. If you're going to fund and extend it for another 6 months, that is a good position, if you're concerned about the passport office continuing.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Ms. McLean, did you have any comments on this item on the table, please?
I do. I have been seriously concerned about the fact that the elimination of several positions in next year's budget has put us in jeopardy with the federal government. Don't care to step on their toes or look bad in that light. And I think the most efficient way to make sure that we at least have 2 authorized passport acceptance clerks is to just continue the position that Ms. Davis has been in, since she is one of our 3 acceptance clerks. And so I think, as Mr. Rapley has worded it, this is the best way to go forward with making sure we're covered and that we're not in breach of any agreements we've made with the federal government.
Has councilman been made fully aware that we are in breach if we do not have 2 passport clerks? You aware of that?
No, I'm not.
Now you are.
Yeah, I've spoken to them, and I don't think we're in any breach.
Ms.
Mayor, I sent Mayor and Council a notification of not only the qualifications that we need to sustain 2 employees being full-time of our acceptance facility office from the State Department in regards to what Ms. Davis had received back from the State Department, saying that this is the process that we have to follow to sustain those 2 positions, and they have to be full-time positions in order to operate the passports for any entity.
And that's the State Department of the United States, correct?
That is their qualifications in us facilitating as a passport agent.
Thank you.
Question. The the employees have to be full-time employees of the city, is that not correct?
Yes, sir, they do.
So they have to have all of their time dedicated to the passport office.
No, not necessarily.
So if we had somebody who was splitting time between the passport office and someplace else, they'd be a legitimate employee as far as the State Department's concerned with regard to the passport office, right?
Yes, and if we were to find another full-time position, if we were to find another full-time person in our organization, they'd have to go through the training and background process from that standpoint. So she's, as Ms. Davis has already, again, been trained and approved from the State Department, again, there would have to be some other areas that she would have to fill her time to do passports and other things for the organization if necessary.
But don't we have somebody else who is also trained as a passport clerk, like one of the court clerks?
We do. Tina is trained as well. And I think we have Jeanette in Public Works, but her position was eliminated and ends at the end of December.
So we do have 2 passport clerks who will carry over into the next fiscal year, right?
No, we don't.
No.
We don't, because Jeanette and Nora were both removed from the budget for next year, so that leaves
I'm
us
sorry,
only
but
with
I'm not
Tina.
understanding you because you talk so fast.
We have 3 trained, Nora, Tina, and Jeanette.
Yeah,
As of January 1st, Jeanette's position is no longer a position, and Nora's position is no longer a position. That leaves
I
us
know.
with 1.
That's the one that we're talking about extending right now to
Nora's.
July is Nora's position.
Yes, sir.
Assuming that at some point she'll become full-time in the passport office.
That's a good hope. I mean, I hope that too, but for now.
Well,
we
you're
need
the
to
one
have-
that put this forward with the idea we were going to have 8,000 passports at the end of the first year. So I think if we do that, we'll be in great shape.
And if not, see you, Nora. That was a joke. Yes.
I just want to be sure that, well, as Mr. McCormick clarified, that we are not extending the administrative assistant finance clerk position, because you are going to be hiring a finance director. That is not a necessary position. So what he suggested is that you were going to find some other work, because there's a requirement, according to you, that the State Department has, that we have to have 2 people, but not to be the administrative assistant finance clerk. Once we do that, we're putting that back in the budget.
Again, the finance director could possibly take on those duties. We currently don't have a finance director in place. At the end of the year, we're still going to have to go through
Well, you would know
payroll
about that.
and accounts payable and other areas that the administrative assistant and finance clerk was doing from that standpoint.
And if you want to assign some work to the passport clerk to do that for a full-time job, you can. I just don't want to have the position of finance clerk funded.
So what we need to do is to title the position that we're establishing as the passport office manager or something similar, the passport office clerk. And we extend that position out until July.
Right.
And that's what we're talking about doing.
30th, till
So I'm going to offer an amendment to the motion that says that we propose to extend, to establish a passport clerk position and fund it through July of
Oh,
2019.
you said June 30th.
I'm sorry?
June 30th, it says here. Don't extend it more. You
I
don't
can't
need-
hear you. Speak up.
He's
June
making,
30th.
he's making an amendment, Leslie. Go ahead, Mr. McCormick.
I'm amending the motion, Mr. Schnall.
Mr. McCormick, the motion you're about to make is out of order because it doesn't tell the public. The agenda item says, extend the administrative assistant finance clerk position until June 30, 2019. It doesn't tell the public we're going to create a new position or change the title. So under the Open Meetings Act, you either have to act on this agenda item consistent with its wording, or this has to come back to the council at another meeting to create a new job title.
Okay, Mr. Schnall, the agenda item says to ensure essential city services and continuation of the passport acceptance office. So you don't think that would let me leverage in the idea of setting up a passport office person?
I don't believe it does, because it says, in order to extend the administrative assistant finance clerk position.
Okay, then I move to table the item till the next council meeting.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah,
Are you moving to table?
he motioned to table.
I move to
Second.
table.
Mr. Mayor, discussion? If this item is
There's
tabled,
no
no discussion
discussion on a
during a
motion to
table.
table.
Okay, so we have a motion to table. We have a second by Ms. Winger. All in favor? All opposed? 2 to 2. Douglas?
I'm going to abstain. I'm not, the problem I have with this. The problem I have with this is that an assistant finance directing clerk, I believe, should be decided whether we have it by the finance director, because only the finance director would know whether or not the job is so overwhelming they need a clerk.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate Mr. Gregory's comment, but Mr. Gregory needs to be asked if he's going to vote one way or another on the motion to table. If he votes one way or the other, then that will decide the motion to table. If he does not vote one way or the other, then the mayor breaks the tie.
Understand. Douglas, are you still going to abstain? Would you quit talking, Leslie, please?
If I vote aye, I'm bringing in the administrative assistants. If I vote nay, I'm not bringing in the finance clerk position. No, you voted to table. The aye is to table. All right, no.
Mayor, one possibility the council might consider is to approve this position with the title stated and to bring it back at the January meeting with a properly worded agenda item to address Mr. McCormick's
Mark,
suggestion.
it's already done 3 to 2.
No, the motion table was defeated.
Right, so we move forward.
You can move forward now to adopt take this action now as worded on the agenda, and Mr. McCormick can request for the council in January to consider changing the title to accommodate his concern, and then be in compliance with the Open Meetings Act.
Anybody want to make that forward?
I'll
Make a
move it
call
as
for
an
the vote.
amendment.
What?
There's already a
Call for the
motion,
vote.
Mr. Mayor.
You call for the vote on the original amendment?
I just moved that be an amendment to the motion.
She did.
I called for the vote on the original motion.
Amendment right now?
Mark, they both said it at the same time.
What,
Let's, Ms. McCormick, Ms. McLean, call for the vote, and Mr. McCormick, what'd you do?
Actually, I don't think I need to do that. Let's go ahead and vote on it. We'll pass it and then do what Mark said next month.
So are we planning this in advance? Is that what we're doing?
what we're trying to do is stay true to our agenda. So there's a motion made by Ms. McLean, seconded by Mr. Gregory, to adopt ordinance number 2018-12-11.
What time was all this taken care of so we can go back and see exactly what happened? What time? What does it say on the computer?
I'm not sure what time we started this agenda item. I did not write that down.
Thank you. Okay, it was a 2-2 vote. What was the vote? 0? It was 3-2?
2 to 3,
The
against
tabling was-
tabling.
Table was 2 to 3.
Okay, so what
Tabling
passed
failed.
is,
So now we're voting on the original.
no, that was the original.
No, that
That
was,
was for the
not.
tabling.
Just the motion, that was just the motion to table.
Okay,
And what we need to do is have a vote on the original motion now and press on to next month, or press on to the next item.
Right.
okay, discussion and possible action on, go ahead.
I've called for the vote on the original motion, which was the ordinance 2018-12-11, to amend the fiscal year 2019 budget and administrative department in order to extend the administrative assistant finance clerk position until June 30th, 2019.
All in favor? Oh, wait a minute. We have Brother Dooling. Thank you. All in favor? All opposed? Okay. You see that? Okay. Seven, authorize the city manager to sign the engagement letter from Armstrong Vaughn Associates and PC to conduct the 2018 fiscal year audit. Mr. Rapley?
So moved.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak on this.
Excuse me?
How long have we had these people as auditors?
We need to have a second, please.
Oh,
Anybody second this?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Okay, Leslie, go ahead, please. How long have we had these people as auditors?
Sorry, I thought Ms. Fegans was going to answer that, but go ahead, Ms. Fegans.
Speaking with Armstrong Vaughn, they have been your auditors since the year of 2009, so approximately 9 years. This will
well,
be their-
that's too long. We're outside of the state requirement on that. What we need to do is post, we probably should have done it before this, but we need to post for qualifications for auditors to apply.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes?
in lieu of not having enough time to do that, it is recommended best practices from the Texas Municipal League that you at least rotate the principal that is in charge of the account. And while I am sure that Debbie Frazier has done a great job as the principal assigned to us from Armstrong Vaughn, at least changing the principal that is assigned to our account for the audit would be one way to address, and then in the next year, put out bids for a new audit firm.
But Mr. Rapley says we have time to post. I asked him that question before the meeting.
I said, again, Ms. Winger, that is an option if council wanted to do. There's no state requirement. Again, like Ms. McClin said, we can change the principal. Right now, the audit process begins roughly in February, and the audit's closed and brought to council at the end of April and May. At this point, if we went out for proposals, this would push our audit probably to July or August at this point.
Why? If we do request for qualifications right now, we can vote for somebody in January and they can start in February, as you said.
Again, there's a schedule for that audit process to follow. I think this is too close to beginning that audit process, and it's something if council wanted to consider next year, then we could do that well in advance.
Yeah, and I had asked for this beforehand and it wasn't done. So that's one of the things that wasn't done. And, you know, we're late, but it can still be done. And would be my amended motion that we post for the position.
Again, Ms. Winger, I have not heard from council or collectively as a council in wishing to do this prior to bringing this engagement letter. I didn't know that council had made a decision to go out for proposals for auditors. Again, following the direction of
Good point.
council.
Good point. Well, we're all here now. So, Douglas, go ahead.
Mr. Schnall, is there any legal requirement that we change auditors over any extended period of time, on every 5 years, 10 years, every year?
Not to my knowledge, Mr. Gregory.
Really?
Thank you.
All right, no, wait a minute.
Ms. McLean?
Well,
Just
Ms. Winger,
attended-
if there is a state statute, then what is it? You're up here arguing with the city attorney that he doesn't
5
know.
years, you can't keep them for more than 5 years.
What's the statute? Can you show it to me? I'd love to see it.
As I was trying to say, I just came back from a TML meetings, and not the only one to have to go. as treasurer, and they do highly recommend that it is done every 5 years. Now, Mr. Rapley is saying that because of the late posting of this, or just the posting of this, it will shove and change how quickly the audit can be done. Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But I think, knowing that the recommendation is that we change auditors every 5 years, I think we ought to return in the spring to make sure there is absolutely no error and call for a new auditor in the spring of next year. Or even more clear, have an ordinance that requires a change of auditors every 5 years. That might be the best way of going about it.
I think, Councilman Gregory, the most appropriate time is, again, when we went through the budget adoption process back in September. And clearly, we had budgeted $18,000 for the audit process. And if council's wish at the time was to look forward to going out for proposals, that would have been sufficient time to put those proposals out. In proceeding, when the audit takes place, again, I've only been here once before, earlier this year when I came aboard in February, when the audit was being initiated and concluded at the end of April, beginning of May. And that would have been a good time for council to say, this is when we'd like to look at going out for proposals for auditors.
I will try to have that ordinance available in January or February of this next year.
Yeah, put it on the calendar. Ms. McLean, did you have anything to say, please?
My only request on this one would be that we are designated a new principal and that be one of our caveats so that we at least have that change, because TML, like Mr. Gregory said, they do recommend that we change firms, and so at least if we can change the principal, that would give us some protection.
You want to make an amendment?
No, it's still hiring the same firm, it's just making sure that when he...
No, it's not, because otherwise we don't have it. So you should make that amendment.
Ms. McLean?
I trust that Mr. Rapley will do what is best practices.
Thank you. Ms. Scott?
It's not,
Mr.
it's not up to
What's his name?
council.
Mr. McCormick?
Okay. It appears to me that there's no hard and fast rule of law that says we have to change auditors. I agree with the idea and principle that we should plan on changing every 5 years. I think we should go ahead and vote on the motion that was made, and then if Mr. Gregory or somebody wants to bring up a motion, or if Mr. Rapley wants to bring up a motion to pass an ordinance to establish that as a rule in our ordinances, we could certainly do that at a later time. But it's not on the agenda now, so we need to proceed with what we've got before us.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Brother Dillon, I can't tell whether you signed up for this one or not. Did you want to say anything? Not now. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So we have a motion and we have a second on the table. It looks like everybody spoke. All in favor of the engagement letter? Thank you. For all opposed? 4 to 1. All right, moving ahead. Thanks, council. We're moving on here. All right, request a date to hold a special council meeting to review and discuss 4 drainage street projects: Banyan, Antler, Mimosa, and North Manton. Mr. Gregory.
I believe, and I've talked with Mr. Rapley about this, there are 4 major projects that really cry to be done. When I brought Banyan to the council the last time, objections were heard that they didn't have time to consider what was given them, and I'm taking note of that objection. I think it would be good if these 4 particular items, Banyan, Antler, Mimosa, which is be a major drainage concern, and North Manton, which would be a major drainage concern, be looked at with just simply thorough discussion, engineers here, to see what's going on, to see whether they are candidates for being put on the, for consideration next year, but to get a full thrashing and review of these things. And I think that would require some evening, sometime before the January council meeting.
And that's what would be, not trying to be funny, but that'd be a workshop, right? I mean, kind of a workshop. We get together.
A workshop.
Mr. Rapley, would you send out some dates, you could speak to the council members.
Yes, Mayor, I will. My conversation with Councilman Gregory, we kind of discussed somewhere around a time frame of our next council meeting in January being January 8th, that maybe that same week on that Thursday, January 10th, possibly hold the workshop, have our engineer here and review those 4 drainage projects. 3 of them, we already have cost. One needs a question in the design, so you know, having the engineer here to have it as a workshop to discuss those. And I think particularly as Mr. Gregory has listed Mimosa, we just need to get some updated figures. And so the idea would be that council would have a couple weeks to absorb those projects and those costs and come back in late January and discuss and approve specifically those 4 drainage projects.
Thank you. Ms. Winger, did you have a comment on that, please?
My question is that Antler is on here, and I thought we just voted for Antler, so why is Antler on here? Are we paving a street that isn't going to stay paved because of drainage? I don't
This was just a
understand.
discussion, I think, is what, about the whole program is the way I understood it.
Well, there's one component on drainage on Antler, which is in the probable cost, and we'll get those firm through the bids. Banyan, we had already received because we discussed that at council a couple months ago, so we already have up-to-date numbers. And North Manton, there was a design done, and I think there's some question about how that was designed and maybe an alternative to that design. And so council needs to discuss, because it might up the cost of modifying that design for council's review. And then Mimosa is in the master drainage study, and our engineers will need to provide an updated cost for consideration as well.
Thank you, Mr. Rapley. Anyone else before we move on? And Mr. Rapley will get in touch with council to find out a proper date for us to have this workshop. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is discuss and possible action to set the city calendar for Community Events 2019. Ms. Scott and Ms. McGlynn. Ladies.
If you go back through the city calendar for the last couple of years, we've had a couple of events that happen every year. Last year, we did add a citywide garage sale, which seemed to be, I can't remember what the numbers were, where we had 10 or 15 people that had garage sales, with a few saying that the notice, which had been, I think, maybe 4 weeks, or 4 to 6 weeks, wasn't quite enough to actually get tuned up for a garage sale. And so the idea behind this would be to set a date for next year for the garage sale, go ahead and get it on the calendar for the traditional mayor's end of school picnic, put the dates for Fiesta, the National Night Out, and holiday lighting of the lights, so that everyone can start planning ahead, and perhaps maybe we'll have even better attendance next year for our events.
Great. Since is this an action item? Sure is. Okay, let's get a motion and a second on the table to move into council, please.
I move that we accept the motion as stated.
Thank you.
I second that.
Okay, you hear that? Okay, with that in mind, Mr. McCormick, did you have any questions on this item?
Not presently.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Ms. Scott, did you have any questions on this item, please?
No.
Comments? Ms. McGlynn, you already did. Any additional, please? Thank you. Ms. Winger?
This is a good idea, but I would just like to request, as with all other things we're scheduling, that we make sure to check that we're not conflicting with any major religious holidays or other significant federal and state holidays.
Thank you, Ms. Winger. Douglas, are you have anything to say, please? Thank you very much. We have a, oh, wait, hang on. Let's see, 10, 10, 9. Brother Dilling?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Brother William Dooling, 201 Gladiola Lane. I appreciate Ms. McGlynn rattling off a list of events, but I think that's the problem with this motion. It doesn't determine what are these things that deserve calendaring and supporting. and I really don't care so much about that, except for my item, which if I have asked the city through various people for the last 2 election cycles to calendar the candidate forum. I think it had another name, doesn't quite come to mind, but the possibility of having whatever candidates are running for whatever, to have the candidate forum, and I think with some radio or TV person to moderate or something like that. It needs to be on the calendar because the election date is fixed, and it has to be a reasonable amount of time before that, after the closure of the time to throw your hat in the ring. So somewhere in there, if it's too close to the election, a lot of people have already voted, and so that's kind of, and I think that happened one year. It was like, well,
Good point.
why are you having this? I already voted, so, you know.
Good point.
So I think some thought needs to go into that, and then I think that day ought to be fixed in stone going forward, because it's tied to a fixed date of the, like, so many days before the, whatever the election date is in that year. Which was it the second Saturday of May or first Saturday or something like that?
Good point.
Yeah. So it's just, I think that's an important event that's probably more important, well, certainly not more important than the mayor's back-to-school picnic, but.
Thank you, Brother
Yes.
Dooling. That's 2 extra trips to Sea Island.
Excellent, excellent. So, but I think it is important in terms of civic engagement and people to actually hear what people stand for and be able to submit either written questions or however it works. So I just suggest that be on the list. Whatever else is on the list, I guess you all will figure it out, but it seems a little squishy.
And Brother Dooling, you won't have to order off the value menu next time. Thank you.
Oh, not the kids' meal? Okay.
Thank you. Okay. If we go ahead and move forward with this, will you come back with at another time to put these events on there?
Sure, I would think that that would be an amendment to the calendar, and thank you, Brother Dooling, for reminding me about that, because that's an excellent idea, and it did not pop into my head when I was working on this, so thank you very much.
So would you go ahead and
Well,
to make that?
Mr. Mayor, that is not a good idea. The forum as set up when we passed the initiative back when Mr. Smiley was mayor was that the candidates decide the forum, the candidates decide the place and the time. Then the mayor of the city determines whether or not, through his power of control of everything in the city, whether it can be done in the city and where. This idea of setting a firm date, that is not the city's prerogative, that is the candidate's prerogative. And that was made very clear when we started this. I think the candidates should not lose control of when they want to have the debate. It has to be mutually done. And the format has to be mutually considered among each pair of candidates. Because we usually have 3 pairs running, and one may not agree what the other 2 want, 2 may not agree, and the other one doesn't. So you cannot make this a generic thing. It just can't be done. It has to be done between the candidates or among the candidates.
Well, and that's one specific item on a calendar that's going to have, I would say, 100 items, but I agree with that. I sure am glad to hear that we'll have a forum that possibly people will show up for this time.
Point of the candidates making that determination, because they're the ones who are running and have to decide whether they're available.
I call it point of order at this point, because
I
it's
don't-
even on the agenda.
I don't understand how, first of all, a forum wasn't even on this agenda, so thank you, Brother Dooling, for bringing it up, which is a good thing. But why do we start focusing on a candidate forum? I think this was about, much importantly, the mayor's picnic and being able to stand under the Castle Hills rain, if you remember that, fire.
May I call for the vote, please?
Sure, go ahead. I think we need to wait for, but Brother Dooling did bring up an interesting topic. How are we going to add items to this should they become, a good point is, good
I don't
point,
understand
Leslie.
why we're voting on it, because you can create the calendar. That's one of the powers of the mayor.
One last power. Gee whiz, I'm sure.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I thought you were stripped of all power.
I am, except for the calendar now, apparently, and the comments, which,
Oh,
yeah.
Well,
but-
according to a previous ordinance, the only thing you could do was emergency situations.
Okay, well, with that, I'll offer everyone a cigar. Okay. All right, so let's get moving here. We gotta finish this up. Discussion and possible action to set the city calendar for the community events of 2019. Brother Dooling has spoken. I believe council has spoken. All in favor? Unanimous. Gee whiz. Okay, thanks. Discussion and possible action on ordinance number 2018-12-811A, installing stop signs on Honeysuckle Lane and the intersection of Sir Arthur Court. Ms. McLean, Scott?
I will gladly take this one. I was approached by 3 residents who called and wanted to have a meeting with myself, Lieutenant Wagner, and Ms. McLean. They live on Honeysuckle, very close to the Sir Arthur Court cross street. And there's a very long stretch of Honeysuckle there. There's a stop sign at the Town View, and then there's not another stop until you get to 410. And they said, they asked to bring out, they call it REO Speedwagon, and track people speeding and that sort of thing through there. And yes, during certain times of day, usually commuting early in the morning, usually in the afternoons. More so there's traffic going through there, a little bit faster than the posted 30 miles an hour. And the big thing that really brought to my attention is there is a concrete drainage area there, and they say, when cars hit it going a little too fast, they bottom out, they make a loud noise that they can hear inside their residence. So they wanted to know if there was a way to possibly slow down traffic a little bit on that long stretch of Honeysuckle. And after putting our minds together and looking it over and discussing it, there was came to the conclusion that some stop signs there at Honeysuckle Lane and Sir Arthur Court would be a good way to slow down that traffic on that long stretch of Honeysuckle. So that is what is being proposed. So it would be breaking up that long stretch of Honeysuckle between Town View and 410.
So I'd like to speak on this.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is an item that I brought up several months ago. The reason that I brought it up at the time was that I had one resident who suggested it to me, and I did not have time before I put it on the agenda. It had to go on right away because he talked to me right before the agenda items were due. I did not have time prior to that to talk to the residents. So, as you may recall, I pulled it because after I put it on the agenda, I went out that weekend and I spoke to all 4 houses on both sides, with the exception of 2 people who I could not find at home. So 14 houses, not 16. And except for the one resident who wanted it and had asked for it, nobody else cared or wanted it. So either they didn't care or they didn't want it. And everybody pointed out to me that right after you get to that, or just before you get to it, to that intersection, there is this dip, which you just referenced, and that causes everybody to slow down. I drive on the street all the time. Believe me, you cannot go fast, because if you do, your head's going to hit the top of the car. You have to be, under 30 miles an hour going through that dip. If you try to hit that dip 30 miles an hour, you're going to have a problem. So you can't, and the 30 miles an hour is what's posted. So if nobody cared about it and we're going to spend money because the people who live there weren't interested, that's why I pulled it. And so unless you've got some new information that everybody's changed their position, I see no reason why we should spend the money doing it.
Okay, let's get a motion and a second. Hang on, let's get a motion and a second on the table, and then we'll start with you, Douglas. Go ahead.
I move that we accept the motion.
Thank you. Any second on that?
I'll second it.
Second, thank you. Douglas?
Ms. Scott, in her research, might have discovered that there has been a long-standing process by how we put in stop signs. I found that out when I was the one who got the stop sign put in on Honeysuckle and Townview, I think it was. You have to have a review by the police chief to determine the traffic flow. You have to also determine whether the people on the street want it. That is how we have done it in the past, because that is, since they're the people being affected, they shouldn't be asked if they want it, and the police department will have to determine whether there's enough cars to determine the cost of putting a stop sign there. I would suggest that rather than we do this, we go by how we've done things for many years, find out whether enough cars to dictate a stop sign, and to find out whether or not the people in the affected area even want it. And that's how we've done it in the past. There was another area, there's another stop sign on, that I got put in, on Carrollwood. Same thing, Carrollwood and Banyan.
Right.
And went through that same process, monitored the traffic, asked everybody around the area whether they want it. It's a reasonable, simple way of doing things, or else we'd have the whole place littered with stop signs all throughout the city. And I would suggest we go by that methodology.
I thank you for the history lesson. When I had 3 residents ask to meet with me, that is a large number. That's the most number of residents I've ever had contact me at one time to all place and plan a meeting at one time. So of course I took what they were asking me to do quite seriously and discussed it with Lieutenant Wagner and with Chief Siemens. So that's why I went ahead and put it on the agenda to propose it, because like I said, I had never had that many residents at one time be so passionate to contact me, want to meet with me, and discuss it with me. And when I put it on, requested to put on the agenda, I thought if there was a process to go through that the city manager would advise me, or perhaps Chief Seaman would advise me to that, but no one ever advised that there was this particular process that you're talking about to go through. I will gladly go knock on doors and talk to people along Honeysuckle if you feel like it needs further investigation. But I am just bringing to you what the citizens brought to me that they're requesting. And that was what, after discussing with the police department, was kind of discussed and looked at as being a possible solution to slowing down the traffic there, that the citizens brought, that they were having
And I did the same
an issue
thing,
with.
so I understand it, but I'm just saying, nobody was interested.
Thank you.
Or they didn't want it.
Well, somebody has showed up tonight to speak that is interested. Yes, sir. Hang on, I'm sorry. Just a second. I'm sorry. I was commenting on that. Hang on. You'll be just a second. Mr. McCormick, do you have anything, please?
Yes, it seems to me like this perhaps should be tabled so that we can go through the full procedure to check with the police and all of that. I think that there are alternatives to a stop sign, and that might be a sign that just says dip wherever that little concrete barrier is. And that's a pretty cheap thing to do, I think. There are other alternatives. I don't think we've gone through the proper procedure to put up stop signs, so that's kind of where I'm at.
Thank you, Mr. McCormick. Ronald, I'm sorry, sir. That's all right. It's good to see you.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm at 136 Honeysuckle Lane, right at the dip, and I think I've spoken to you before.
You were the one who asked me.
So Brent Crownover, my next door neighbor, myself, and Chance have talked to Ms. McClendon, Ms. Scott about this. There's, almost 2,000 cars a day that pass by that intersection. The speeding is, I think there was roughly 25% of those cars are speeding. We had a set of tracks laid down, 150 feet of drag strip tracks at Town View headed north. And, Leslie Winger has passed me on the left-hand side when I'm turning into my driveway. And she drives at a very high rate of speed up and down Honeysuckle Lane. The school buses do it, and I think that putting a stop sign there would slow some of those 2,000 cars down. So that's, and Jocelyn next door was also in favor of it. You didn't come out to my house, you didn't speak to Brent, who's building his house, the neighbor across the street,
Well,
catty-corner to us.
aren't you the one who asked me about it?
Yes.
Well, and of course, though, I had already talked to you. I knew that you wanted it, that's why I spent the time talking to everybody else.
So Jocelyn next door, my next door neighbor at 138 wants it. Brent Crownover at 134
Okay, well, that's not what
wants
she
it.
told me at the time, but your neighbor next door who hasn't moved in yet was never home. So he's one of the two people I just said that I wasn't able to
Always
talk
there,
to.
he's building his house. He's there constantly.
Okay,
He's
well,
single-handedly building that
I know,
house.
he's been doing
there
it for
all
2
the time,
years. Yeah,
okay?
I know.
You see his
I'm
Suburban
not
parked in front of
arguing
his
with
house.
you.
Sure
So-
sounds like it to me.
I'm just saying that that I took the time because I put it on the agenda. If you look back, you'll see. I told you I would, I did.
And it got pulled.
No, and I pulled it because after talking to the rest of your neighbors, they either weren't interested or they didn't want it. So that's why I pulled it.
Hang on, Ronald, hang on just a second. Mr. Rapley, how much does a stop sign cost?
Mayor, it's in the backup in the agenda com. It's $308.
I will personally pay for that stop sign. It seems to be that cost is a problem and nothing else, so I will personally pay for that. You just said it was.
I did not say that.
You just said that. You want to roll the
I did not say
tape back
the
again?
cost was the problem. I said
You
the
said that
people-
the cost was a problem and that we don't need to spend the money.
The people on the street need to be able to decide. We do that all the time. As Douglas pointed out, we can't suddenly change it. We have to get a buy-in.
I would sure like to know how many people have you called in on this agenda item that you've heard do not want this stop sign? I keep hearing about these mysterious people out there. Who are these people?
I'll give you their names.
Well, do it. Let's go ahead. Anybody I sign up, Squire got up here the other day and read off what, 130 names? Where's yours?
Can we
I'll
move-
pay for the stop sign, okay? So it's council's decision whether or not we're going to do it or not.
Mayor, again, there's currently not a process, and it is council's decision. In other cities I've worked, there is a process for warranting a stop sign, usually following uniform traffic code manual from that standpoint by the state. But in this case, there's nothing from, the city has adopted a process, so again, it's council's approval on this moving forward. And Chief can speak to the history of stop signs being put in our community. Like I said, this is the first stop sign that's been brought here for consideration. I do recall Ms. Winger's item that was, I believe, tabled back in, I think,
No,
September.
pulled it.
Pulled it. But again, it's up to council for moving this forward.
Johnny, did you have anything to say, sir?
I'm not aware of a formal process, but I think Councilman Gregory is right. There is due diligence involved, and I thought it was personally executed. We visited with Councilwoman Scott and McLean several times on this. Obviously, we visited with residents on it to some degree. We certainly didn't walk the streets and ask. I mean, we felt that if council brought it forward, that they had, like as Councilwoman Winger did, that there was something else driving that overruled anything we would have to say about it. However, we have done several traffic studies in that area, and I could provide information there if I can be assistance in that manner.
Ronald, did you have anything else to say, sir?
Mayor,
Well, be sure and pass on to the people down there. The mayor will personally pay for that stop sign if council would want to keep your neighbors safe, okay?
Chief,
Yes, sir.
has there been a study done on that street?
Yes, sir. We've done at least two that I know of, and we do, as we've mentioned before, 3-day studies.
Here's the reason why you do due diligence, as
That's
you
right.
said. The reason you do due diligence is that everybody will want a stop sign at
Yes,
their
sir.
intersection.
Agreed. Agreed.
That's the sole reason you do it.
Absolutely.
And you're telling me it has been done.
The study's been done. Now, I will tell you this, the findings probably don't support much change. I think if the citizens' outcry is enough, that council should take their advice and determine with a vote whether it's warranted or not. I will say this, I don't recall a requirement percentage-wise of speeders for a stop sign. There is one for changing the speed limit on a sign that the text dot does.
That's right.
That you're
That's
probably
right.
aware of, the 15%, we're not close to that. But if the citizens are recognizing an issue there and they have your ear, I think it's council's job to vote on it like.
Based on
Councilwoman
your
Winger.
due diligence of
Yes,
this
sir.
area, what is the recommendation to the council?
Well, stop signs don't affect us. We would prefer those over speed humps, Councilman. Stop signs won't affect us, myself, or emergency services, any emergency services, getting down that street like speed humps would. We'll take stop signs
So
over
you're
speed
recommending
humps.
the street sign based upon your due diligence?
I recommend it if the citizens do. I don't think that the egregiousness of the speeders wasn't there, but there have been cases, and I obviously don't live on that street to see how much of a problem it is with them hitting the speed hump and or the ditch and causing the noise that he's hearing inside his home. But I can tell you that the numbers don't support a speed limit change.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I hope that helps.
Chief, Mr. Harada, do you have anything to elaborate
Thank
on
you,
this
Ron.
item? From a historical context?
Just one. The process that y'all are speaking of, 100% on one condition. It was Northcrest. We all changed that, and all the petition had to come in to change it to a one-way at those certain times, and those 3 stop signs were added. But no other petitions, process is needed for just the adding of the stop signs, as the ones that were actually added on Gladiola and Twin Leaf, or Trillium, excuse me. But and for the stop signs, Carrollwood also, you just passed those on the approval, but because of the fact that you actually changed that street and got a petition for all those pedestrians that were walking there, that's where Northcrest changed all that around. That was the only one.
And you had a situation where the Texas Code, when Danube wanted to close Danube from Jackson Keller, the state law says if you have one person who objects, you can't do it. So there are laws that come into play, but you've done your due diligence, and that's what I wanted to see done.
Also, Honeysuckle is an MPO street.
I'm sorry?
It's an MPO street because they have given money for paving in the past,
Okay.
which is one of the reasons I objected to our paving it the last time we did, because we could have gotten MPO money for that street. So they consider it to be one of the major streets. As you know, one of the issues that we took up with TxDOT was the fact that they were measuring the traffic on Honeysuckle, and they were claiming it's very light traffic. Well, we don't think so.
Different standards.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
ma'am.
we
Relative.
don't think so. Yeah.
That's right.
Right,
Agreed.
yeah.
Okay, since Brother Dooling is not signed up for this item. Elvis has left the building. Okay, with that said, let's call for the vote. All in favor? All opposed?
Mayor, if you wish to pursue that purchase, you'd have to make a donation to the city.
Sorry, it just passed. There wasn't anything about me paying for it, so.
I was just
But I'll be
clarifying.
glad to donate however much money, double that,
Because I'm gonna listen
to the animal
street, you know, we
fund.
want to listen to them, that's fine.
Mayor,
Streets, are you kidding and let these guys get a hold of it?
Mayor,
Yes.
I believe that I didn't see Ms. Winger's hand on either. I just want to make sure I didn't miss.
Oh,
Did
Ms.
not
Winger,
vote,
how did you
or-
vote on the last item? Yes or no? It was a stop sign. Happens to me too. I know. I'm asking Ms. Winger how she voted on the last item.
I didn't vote, because I choose to listen to the people who live on the street.
So are you abstaining or are you voting no?
I'm abstaining.
She abstained.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to item number 11. That ought to be a good one.
Mr. Mayor, can we have a 5-minute recess, please?
Excuse me?
5-minute recess, please.
5-minute recess. We got a 5-minute recess, but let's make it